The castle loomed like a wound carved into the mountain, a grey fortress where winter never seemed to end. Szejde Castle. In the valleys below, peasants whispered of the lights that burned past midnight, of screams that the wind carried across the snow. They spoke her name only in half-breaths, as though saying it aloud might draw her gaze. Erzsébet Bathory, Countess of one of Europe's most powerful families, beautiful, brilliant, untouchable, and if rumour was to be believed, utterly monstrous. Elizabeth Bathory was born in 1560, at the height of Hungarian nobility's power, a child of wealth, status, and dangerous privilege. Her family's bloodline stretched into the thrones of Poland and Transylvania. As a girl, she was educated in Latin, Greek, and German, taught by scholars, and trained in the refined cruelty of noble etiquette. She could read poetry and dictate orders of execution with equal grace. When she married Count Ferenc Nadasti at 15, the union cemented one of the most formidable alliances in Central Europe. The people called him the Black Knight of Hungary, a warrior who led campaigns against the Ottoman Turks with such brutality that his name inspired dread on both sides of the battlefield. But when the Black Knight died in 1604, the widow's castle grew darker. Left in control of vast estates, Elizabeth reigned from her stronghold in Szejde. She was respected, feared, and by many, revered. But power in a feudal world is always a double-edged sword. Whispers began to circulate among the villages that girls sent to serve the Countess were vanishing. At first, they were dismissed as superstition. After all, what peasant dared accuse a Bathory of crime? But the whispers grew, mothers wept in the fields, fathers stormed the castle gates, only to be turned away by guards in black livery. The official records later described what followed not as murder, but as excessive cruelty beyond nature. It began, they said, with discipline, punishment for clumsy servants. But discipline became ritual, and ritual became obsession. Young peasant girls, often barely teenagers, were lured into her household with the promise of noble employment. To serve the Lady of Szejde was to step closer to power, a dream for any commoner. Yet once the heavy gates closed behind them, there was no escape. Letters went unanswered. Families never saw their daughters again. The castle became a labyrinth of silence. Witnesses later spoke of her confidants, Anna Darvulia, Ilona Yor, Dorothea Sentes, women who carried out the Countess's orders with mechanical precision. Together they maintained a system of recruitment and concealment. Darvulia, a woman rumoured to dabble in charms and poisons, was said to have been Elizabeth's teacher in both cruelty and secrecy. In 1609, the whispers reached the church. István Magyari, a Lutheran minister, wrote directly to King Matthias, accusing the Countess of inhuman acts against God and nature. It was a dangerous claim. Nobility rarely faced trial. But even kings trembled at rumours of noble corruption, for it hinted at decay within the very order of Europe's hierarchy. The most infamous accusations would come later, the so-called bathing rituals. Court records from 1611 describe tiled chambers, basins of water, and punishments conducted in a cold, methodical manner. Some claimed that warm water was used not for cleansing, but as part of a grotesque ceremony. From these testimonies rose the legend that Elizabeth Bathory bathed in the blood of virgins to preserve her youth, a tale so horrifying it transcended time. Yet historians now know this image was born decades after her death, an exaggeration that grew with every retelling. The truth was different, but perhaps even darker. Survivors described her calmness during the punishments. There was no frenzy, no madness, only precision. She ordered. They obeyed. Her cruelty was not a scream. It was a command whispered through clenched teeth. In her world, pain became a measure of control, and control was the only language the powerful understood. And then came winter. The castle stood high among the little Carpathians, where the cold cut through bone and stone alike. Witnesses told of the Countess using that very cold as her weapon. Servants testified that girls were forced to stand outside, stripped of their garments, drenched in freezing water, and left beneath the night sky. The snow beneath them turned to ice, the air filled with silence. From a high balcony the Countess was said to watch, her figure still, her eyes unblinking. Some claimed she believed suffering purified the soul, others said it was amusement. Either way, the line between myth and fact blurred with every testimony. in December 1610, the whispers finally became thunder. Palatine György Thurzó, acting on the king's orders, led an armed band to Szeged Castle. What they found inside would shake Hungary's nobility to its core. The official record states that when Thurzó entered the castle, he found the Countess red-handed. The phrase, egregium tamen apprehendimus, still chills historians. We have caught her in the act. Within the walls, Thurzó's men discovered bodies, some lifeless, others barely clinging to breath. Servants fled, others fell to their knees, confessing under oath that they had followed her commands. One chambermaid described how victims were restrained during punishment. Another recounted how letters from families were destroyed to erase their existence. The investigation that followed became one of the largest in early modern Europe. Over 300 witnesses were summoned. Servants, villagers, clergy. All spoke of missing girls, strange rituals, and nightly screams that no one dared to answer. Some claimed there existed a book, Elizabeth's journal, containing the names of all her victims, more than 600 in total. The book was never found, and historians suspect it may never have existed. But the sheer number of testimonies painted a portrait so consistent, so damning, that even royal blood could not wash it away. And yet, she was never tried in open court. To publicly prosecute a noblewoman of her rank would have destabilized the very hierarchy the kingdom relied upon. So Thurzó and the king acted quietly. Her accomplices, Ilona Jo, Dorothea Sentes and others, were executed, their bodies burned as a warning. Elizabeth herself was placed under perpetual house arrest. A room within her own castle was sealed with bricks, leaving only a small slit for food and air. No visitors, no trial, no final confession. Just silence. There she remained for 4 years. The legend says she scratched words into the stone walls, though no one knows if that's true. She died in 1614, her body discovered cold and still, lying beneath a thin blanket. Outside, the peasants celebrated. Inside, the walls kept their secrets. Yet history never forgets a story like hers. Over centuries, the Countess of Blood became a myth, a warning, a symbol. Some historians see her as Europe's first documented serial killer. Others insist she was the victim of a conspiracy, framed by powerful men eager to seize her lands after her husband's death. After all, every witness was either a subordinate or a rival, and the courts never allowed her to speak in her defence. So who was Elizabeth Bathory, a sadist cloaked in silk, or a woman crushed beneath the politics of empire? The truth may be lost to time, buried under centuries of fear and fascination. But what remains certain is this. Her name became legend because it exposed something Europe rarely dared to confront, that even those born into privilege could become monsters, and that the cruelty of power was not confined to the battlefield but could thrive behind the elegant masks of nobility. 4 centuries later, her story still stirs unease. The candlelight of her castle is long extinguished. The snow has covered the grounds where screams once echoed. But the question endures, lingering like a shadow over history. Was she the predator of her age, or merely its reflection?